The Galactic Empire stretched across 1,000 suns, a web of light and control so vast that even the concept of resistance had become a myth. Worlds bent their knees without question. Civilizations older than humanity had long since been absorbed into the imperial machine, administrators, governors, soldiers, all cogs in an engine that believed itself eternal. From the halls of the Senate to the farthest mining moons, every being understood one truth: the Empire was order, and order was unchallenged. So when whispers reached the core about an isolated species calling themselves Terrans, curiosity was mild, amusement even greater. They were new, it was said. Aggressively expansionist within their single system, primitive by galactic standards, but loud, signals and probes scattered across their neighboring worlds. The Empire's academicians dismissed them as another adolescent civilization. Still, a border patrol caught fragments of Terran transmissions, concise, encrypted, and impossible to decode. That was enough to attract the attention of the Strategic Council. Meetings were convened in grand marble chambers where holograms of entire sectors floated between senators. "They've weaponized artificial intelligences," one observer announced, voice half mocking. "Claimed independence from biological oversight." Laughter rippled through the chamber. "A species that can't manage emotion wants to manage machines? Adorable." Others, more cautious, suggested observation. But arrogance was the currency of the Empire, and its coffers overflowed. A demonstration, they agreed, would suffice, show the Terrans their place before they became an inconvenience. A fleet was assembled at Antares Prime, one of the Empire's great shipyards. 200 capital ships, escorted by thousands of cruisers and drones, each vessel powered by reactors that could ignite moons. The admirals treated it as a parade more than a campaign. "We'll make an example," Admiral Soliker proclaimed before the Senate. "A lesson to remind our vassals what happens to those who forget the hierarchy." The senators cheered. The Emperor gave no reply, only a faint nod, the kind given to routine matters. A Terran diplomatic envoy had visited the border months before, escorted by an unarmed courier craft. The encounter had been brief and uneventful, except for one detail that still unsettled the Imperial ambassador. He described them as plain, calm, eyes steady, posture relaxed, every word measured. They had smiled when he mentioned the Empire's reach, smiled again when he boasted of its conquests, and smiled once more when he warned that resistance was futile. It was not a hostile smile. It was the kind one gives when watching a child threaten a storm. The ambassador remembered it vividly, even as others dismissed his unease. When the Senate convened to formalize the campaign, no one questioned success. "A single system against our armada?" a delegate sneered. "We'll be home by the next rotation." The Empire's historians had long since erased defeats from their records. The very concept of failure had no place in imperial doctrine. Conquest was procedural. The Terran incursion would be no different. On the day of departure, the fleet rose from Antares' orbit like a second dawn, engines glowing violet against the void. Civilians gathered on observation decks to watch the spectacle. Children waved miniature banners. Merchants predicted lucrative trade rights from new territories. Across the Empire's internal networks, the campaign's slogan spread like wildfire. "One system, one lesson." But on the Imperial flagship, beneath the fanfare, a few officers felt an unease they couldn't name. Sensor data from Terran space was inconsistent. Too little noise, too much precision. Probes vanished without trace. Drone scouts returned corrupted, their data streams filled with static patterns that almost resembled laughter. Engineers blamed interference. Analysts blamed malfunction. No one dared blame the unknown. As the fleet accelerated towards Sol, the admiral stood before his crew. "We bring civilization to chaos," he declared. Applause followed, yet among the applause, the ambassador's earlier words echoed faintly in his mind. They smiled. When the stars stretched into lines and the fleet vanished into the corridor of folded space, the Senate erupted in applause broadcast across every imperial world. Another victory to record, another story of dominance to tell. But somewhere, beyond their charts, a signal pulsed an answer, calm, rhythmic, unmistakably deliberate. It carried no message of surrender, no declaration of war. It was simply a transmission of coordinates, precise to the atom, as if inviting them closer. The Empire's admirals took it as mockery. The ambassador, watching from afar, took it as something else entirely. He remembered that human smile, and for the first time in his long career, he felt pity for his own kind. By the time the first Imperial vessel crossed Neptune's shadow, the stars around Sol had grown oddly quiet. Communications lagged, sensors flickered, and the fleet pressed onward, still believing themselves the hunters. They never noticed that their prey had already set the stage. The Imperial Armada emerged from fold space at the edge of the Terran system, a storm of metal and radiation spreading across the void. Thousands of ships aligned into formation, their hulls reflecting the dim light of distant Sol. The commanders expected resistance, perhaps a desperate broadcast or a swarm of improvised defense drones. Instead, there was nothing, no fleet, no chatter, no panic. The system lay disturbingly quiet, like a stage prepared for an unseen audience. Admiral Soliker gave the order to initiate contact protocols. A transmission was composed in every major galactic tongue, projected on all frequencies with the ceremonial gravity of conquest. It declared the Empire's arrival, demanded unconditional surrender, and offered integration under Imperial law. The message repeated for an hour before the first response came. It was not a voice, not even text. A calm synthetic tone stated only, "Transmission received." Then silence resumed. The fleet's officers exchanged uncertain glances. No acknowledgement of terms, no sign of distress, no movement from the human colonies orbiting Mars or the scattered habitats along the asteroid belt. The Empire's translators checked and rechecked their systems. The message was genuine, not interference. The words themselves were harmless, but the tone, steady, indifferent, was unnerving. Soliker ordered reconnaissance to begin. The first wave of drones dispersed toward the Martian settlements. They found vast networks of domes and cities, their lights on, power grids active, but no heat signatures of life. Residential blocks stood immaculate, empty. Automated systems cleaned streets and maintained atmosphere, as though the inhabitants had simply walked out minutes before. On the comm feeds, the crews joked uneasily about ghost colonies. Then one of the drones transmitted a single visual, a faint human figure standing on a distant ridge, unmoving, watching the sky. The feed cut out seconds later, systems fried beyond repair. Soliker dismissed it as coincidence, but tension rippled through the command decks. The fleet advanced cautiously. Ships targeted orbital platforms, obliterating them in synchronized strikes. Yet even those targets felt wrong. The platforms offered no return fire, no signals, just silent machinery rigged to detonate when scanned. The shockwaves tore through the void, uselessly violent. When the Empire turned its guns toward the asteroid belt, resistance finally appeared, except it was mechanical. Thousands of small metallic fragments began drifting from the belt, moving with unnatural coordination. At first they seemed like debris, then sensors registered maneuvering thrusters, faint but precise. Swarms of microdrones coalesced into clouds, not attacking directly but forming barriers, jamming fields, scattering sensor arrays. Imperial ships fired into them, but the fragments absorbed and redirected the energy into the void, turning the battle into chaos. Every report that came back was contradictory. Some claimed the drones emitted coded pulses, others said they broadcast fragments of old Earth music, distorted into static. The science officers tried to analyze the patterns, but no two recordings matched. "They're toying with us," muttered one commander. Hours turned into a day. The Empire's communication network grew unstable, relays misaligned by interference that no one could trace. The fleet's AI navigators reported anomalies, minor gravitational fluctuations around the gas giants, inconsistent with known masses. Probes sent to investigate vanished without a trace. Soliker's patience began to fracture. "Enough of this," he barked. "Bring the fleet to readiness. We'll burn their colonies and end this farce." Orders relayed instantly. Waves of plasma fire erupted toward Martian orbit, glassing what little remained of the abandoned structures. The bombardment was absolute. When the dust cleared, there was nothing left but silence, and a faint signal, repeating on all frequencies. It was the same voice as before. Calm, mechanical, unmistakably human. Transmission received? For the first time in his career, Solitaire hesitated before responding. He felt the weight of that phrase, as though it carried meaning his instruments couldn't measure. His sub-commanders urged pursuit, destroyed the remaining stations, forced the humans to reveal themselves. Yet deep within the command bridge, the ambassador who had once met the Terrans stood silent, watching the data streams. He recognized something others did not. Every abandoned outpost, every destroyed platform, had been placed exactly where the fleet expected resistance. The humans had guided them here deliberately. When he voiced the concern, Solitaire dismissed it as paranoia. The Empire could not be manipulated. But the ambassador noticed one more thing, a faint pattern in the noise across all sensors, timed perfectly with the fleet's engine cycles. It was synchronized, deliberate, almost mocking. He turned to the Admiral and said quietly, "They're watching us, Admiral. Every movement. Every word." Solitaire refused to answer. His pride could not allow fear. Yet, somewhere beyond the static and the silence, the unseen Terran eyes observed with amusement, waiting for the Empire to take one step further into the trap they'd already sprung. Confusion rippled through the Imperial fleet like a silent infection. Data logs filled with inconsistencies, ships reported seeing phantom contacts, energy readings that appeared and vanished within seconds, and sensor ghosts forming impossible geometric patterns. The admirals accused each other of technical incompetence until the engineering corps confirmed the systems were functioning perfectly. The interference wasn't natural, it was calculated. Something, or someone, was rewriting the laws of engagement, while the Empire watched helplessly from its throne of arrogance. At first, the officers tried to interpret the anomalies as harmless pranks of a fading civilization, but the tone shifted when entire squadrons began reporting simultaneous power fluctuations. Hull integrity alarms triggered without cause, navigation grids flickered, and then, abruptly, everything returned to normal. The disruptions caused no damage, but the precision was too deliberate. It was not an attack, it was a demonstration. Humanity wasn't defending, they were observing, dissecting, testing. As the fleet advanced deeper toward the inner system, a growing unease took root among the crews. Broadcasts from human colonies continued, routine maintenance reports, weather bulletins, public service messages, all perfectly normal, as though nothing were happening. When intercepted and decoded, they made no reference to the invading armada. The humans were treating a galactic invasion like background noise. The psychological effect was devastating. Soldiers trained for fear and defiance instead faced indifference. No one in the Empire understood it, and that ignorance gnawed at them more effectively than any weapon could. The first true counterstrike came without warning. A frigate near Jupiter reported multiple micro-impacts across its hull. They were too slow to be projectiles, too fast to be debris. When analysis began, every shard recovered was found to be a nanostructured probe, each one transmitting data back toward the inner system. Within minutes, the ship's reactor shut down. No explosion, no overheating, simply a clean, controlled failure. When engineers restored partial power, they found every line of Imperial code replaced by Terran text. A single phrase repeated endlessly across every console. "Do not proceed." The other captains mocked it as psychological warfare, but the laughter died when the same phenomenon occurred on 3 more ships, then 10, then 30. The Empire's technological superiority, once its pride, had become its vulnerability. The Terrans weren't fighting them head-on, they were dismantling them with precision that bordered on contempt. Then came the broadcast. Every Imperial vessel, from the largest dreadnought to the smallest scout drone, received the transmission simultaneously. No channel was safe, no encryption effective. The image that appeared was not human in the conventional sense. No face, no insignia, only a silhouette rendered in sterile light. The voice, calm and patient, spoke without malice. "You have entered restricted space belonging to the Terran Union. We do not consent to your presence. Your incursion will cease immediately. This is your only warning. The words were simple, almost polite, but something about the delivery made every being aboard those ships feel smaller. It wasn't defiance, it was certainty. The Empire, used to groveling enemies and impassioned speeches, now faced an adversary that treated them like a natural phenomenon, predictable, irrelevant, already accounted for. The admirals convened an emergency council, furious and humiliated. They agreed the humans were bluffing. The order went out, retaliate. Every ship that could fire, fired. Beams of plasma and kinetic projectiles tore through orbital paths and asteroid fields. Yet nothing struck a living target. Every impact hit decoys, hollow satellites, and heat signatures projected by drones. It was as if humanity had already mapped every trajectory before the first shot was fired. As the Empire's energy reserves dropped and their frustration mounted, a strange sound began creeping into their calms. It started faintly, distorted bursts, rhythmic and deliberate. When isolated and amplified, it was unmistakable. Laughter. Not manic or cruel, but amused, distant, like an adult watching a child make a predictable mistake. In that moment, the Empire understood the scale of their miscalculation. The Terrans weren't improvising, they had expected this entire confrontation. Every sensor anomaly, every false colony, every data ghost was a step in a sequence designed to study Imperial behavior. Humanity had drawn them in, provoked them, and catalogued every reaction. The ambassador, still aboard the flagship, whispered the realization aloud. They never feared us. They wanted to see how we'd respond. His words went unacknowledged, drowned beneath the static of command channels as officers shouted and systems failed. The laughter continued for hours, fading only when the last of the Empire's long-range scans went blind. What replaced it was a chilling silence, accompanied by a simple message, repeated across every screen. Observation complete. For the first time in Imperial history, the fleet commander ordered full retreat without a single confirmed casualty on the opposing side. But retreat was impossible. The Terrans hadn't just trapped their ships, they had trapped their certainty. And somewhere, unseen and unreachable, humanity smiled in quiet amusement. The fleet advanced toward Jupiter's orbit with mounting desperation, determined to restore the illusion of control. Every system was recalibrated, every channel encrypted threefold. The Empire's commanders vowed to crush whatever intelligence had dared mock them. Yet, for all their power, the void remained indifferent. No human fleet appeared, no resistance presented itself, only the silence of space, heavy and deliberate. Then the stars around them began to move. It took several minutes before anyone realized it wasn't motion but distortion. Light bent subtly, gravitational readings fluctuated, and navigation systems began reporting impossible positions. Ships that were kilometers apart now appeared to overlap. The Empire's formation disintegrated as captains struggled to reorient themselves. Then, without warning, the distortions resolved into outlines, thousands of them. Stealth vessels, invisible to every known sensor array, had been surrounding the fleet the entire time. The Terrans hadn't been hiding, they had been waiting. The first pulse came from nowhere, a single burst of electromagnetic interference that swept through the entire armada. Engines sputtered, reactors dimmed, weapon systems went offline. No explosion, no destruction, just control stripped away as if by divine decree. Before the admirals could react, every Imperial ship registered an incoming data override. Terran code infiltrated their systems faster than they could isolate it. Firewalls collapsed one by one, and for a moment, the fleet's network itself began to speak back. On every console, a message appeared simultaneously. Demonstration in progress. Human warships emerged from the distortion fields, sleek and angular, their surfaces rippling with adaptive armor that reflected no color. They moved in perfect synchronization, every maneuver calculated to the millisecond. Instead of firing, they transmitted. Their signals mapped the entire Imperial fleet, tagging weak points, analyzing trajectories, predicting outcomes. The Terrans could have annihilated them in seconds, but they chose restraint. This was not war, it was instruction. When the first human railguns fired, they did not aim for hulls. They targeted engines, communication arrays, and weapon capacitors. The impacts were precise, each shot disabling a system without killing a single crew member. Imperial dreadnoughts spun helplessly, engines melted but reactors stable. Missiles meant to intercept the Terrans simply vanished mid-flight, disassembled by directed energy fields that stripped them to atoms. The humans had mastered warfare at a level beyond imagination, clean, exact, and mercilessly efficient. Admiral Soliker, humiliated and enraged, ordered all remaining ships to fire manually. Without guidance systems, they unleashed blind volleys into the void. The Terran fleet responded not with counter-fire but with silence. Their ships shifted positions in graceful arcs, allowing every plasma bolt to pass harmlessly through empty space. The Imperial crews watched helplessly as their weapons meant nothing. When the last of their ammunition was spent, the Terrans finally replied, not through battle, but through communication. A voice, the same calm tone that had haunted them since arrival, filled every channel. This engagement is concluded. You will not proceed beyond this orbit. You are not prisoners, but you are finished. The transmission ended without further demand. Then, across the Imperial fleet, power returned, engines restarted, systems restored, weapons still disabled. It was an unmistakable gesture of dominance and mercy combined. Soliker could barely speak. He turned to his staff, face pale beneath the glow of failing consoles. They spared us, one whispered. No, the ambassador corrected quietly. They're teaching us. Outside, Terran vessels reformed into tight geometric arrays, their movements mathematical in precision. A single burst of light erupted from their formation, and suddenly, every Imperial ship's navigation system displayed a set of coordinates far from Sol, an exit vector. It was a polite escort out of Terran space. The message accompanying it was brief. Go home. The admirals debated defiance, but there was no strength left to pretend. Every calculation showed the same result: any attempt to fight would mean instantaneous obliteration. The Empire, accustomed to dictating the terms of history, had been rendered irrelevant in minutes. No propaganda could mask what had happened. They had faced humanity, and humanity had chosen not to destroy them. That choice alone carried more weight than any weapon. As the Imperial fleet limped away from Jupiter's orbit, sensors caught one final phenomenon: the Terran vessels fading back into distortion, disappearing like whispers swallowed by silence. Not one human ship pursued. They didn't need to. Their point had been made with terrifying clarity. They held absolute control yet exercised none of it for vengeance. On the Imperial flagship, Soliker stood motionless, staring into the dark where the Terrans had been. He had witnessed the impossible: power restrained by purpose, dominance tempered by intellect. For the first time, he understood that the humans' greatest weapon was not their technology or tactics, but their terrifying calm. They didn't rage, they didn't boast, they simply decided outcomes. The Empire had launched an invasion to prove its supremacy. Instead, it had found a mirror reflecting its own arrogance back with surgical precision. Humanity had not just won a battle, they had rewritten the definition of power itself. When the shattered remnants of the Imperial Armada limped back across the fold space corridors, the galaxy held its breath. The Empire had never known defeat, never returned from war without trophies or tribute. Yet the fleet arrived without glory, half its ships disabled, every weapon silent, every officer shaken beyond words. No enemy corpses, no battle wreckage, not even the satisfaction of resistance. They had fought ghosts that left them alive on purpose. The Senate chamber, once a stage for triumph, became a tomb of disbelief. Reports poured in from the surviving captains, all telling the same impossible truth: the humans had dismantled them without hatred, without vengeance, and without a single unnecessary death. The Empire's scholars tried to frame it as a tactical miscalculation. Analysts spun theories of advanced cloaking fields, gravitational manipulation, or precognitive algorithms. But none of the explanations fit the psychological aftermath. Every crew member who'd seen the Terran fleet described the same sensation: an awareness of being studied, dissected, and dismissed. They hadn't been opponents, they had been examples in a lesson about consequence. The Terran's restraint had done what no war could, it exposed the Empire's hollowness. As days passed, the silence from Sol became the loudest sound in the galaxy. No pursuit, no follow-up communication, not even demands for reparations. The humans had simply vanished back into their system, as if the incident hadn't mattered at all. That indifference unnerved the Empire more than annihilation ever could. The Senate convened emergency sessions to decide how to interpret such behavior. Some called it mercy. Others insisted it was a warning. The Emperor listened in silence, his expression unreadable, before finally declaring a single order. "We will not provoke them again." The decree spread faster than propaganda ever had. For the first time in recorded imperial history, expansion halted. Borders once pushed outward with arrogance now retracted quietly. Trade routes near Terran space were abandoned, exploration vessels rerouted. The official record claimed it was strategic redeployment. Unofficially, it was fear. A fear so profound it reshaped policy, culture, and even religion. Beyond the Empire's borders, word spread through allied worlds and independent systems. Stories emerged of humans who fought with precision instead of fury, who conquered without killing. The legend grew faster than truth could restrain it. Some alien races began to revere humanity as guardians of balance. Others whispered of them as silent gods cloaked in mortal form. In markets and military academies alike, the phrase, "the Terran calm," became shorthand for an unshakable confidence, the kind born not from superiority, but from absolute certainty. For the survivors, that calm became a haunting memory. Veterans of the campaign often awoke in the night recalling the soundless moment when their ships stopped responding, the eerie stillness that followed, and that single message appearing across every screen, "Go home." Many resigned their commissions, unable to reconcile pride with humiliation. The ambassador who had once met the humans before the war retired to a remote world, writing endlessly about the meaning of that smile he'd seen years earlier. His final manuscript concluded, "They never sought dominion. They only sought understanding. And when they found it, they pitted us." Centuries later, as the Empire fragmented under its own inertia, historians would look back and mark that battle as the moment the galaxy changed direction. The Terran intervention was never recorded in human archives. No broadcasts, no memorials, no commemoration. To them, it had been a necessary correction, a reminder to an arrogant civilization that power without purpose is weakness disguised as strength. Humanity returned to silence, content to let the stars forget. But the stars never did. Every empire that rose afterward measured its ambition against the memory of the Terrans. Military strategists taught caution with their name. Philosophers used their restraint as proof that enlightenment and dominance could not coexist. Even religions adapted, crafting prayers that spoke of unseen watchers who punished hubris with quiet efficiency. In every retelling, one truth remained constant: the humans had smiled, and the galaxy had trembled. As the last loyal fleets of the Empire faded into history, one transmission continued to circulate on the deep net channels, a fragment of audio recovered from the flagship's black box. A calm human voice, recorded in the middle of the battle, speaking without anger or triumph. "We are not your enemy. But if you insist on learning through pain, we will teach." No one ever verified its authenticity, yet the message endured for generations, quoted in every academy, etched into memorials that stood long after the Empire's flags were dust. It became more than a warning, it became a creed. Because in that voice, the galaxy heard the one thing it had forgotten in its centuries of conquest: humility. Humanity never conquered the stars. They didn't need to. They simply reminded them that there are forces far more dangerous than wrath, calm, deliberate minds that smile before ending wars without firing a shot. And long after the Empire was gone, long after its name was lost to time, one truth remained carved into the memory of creation itself: humanity had smiled in amusement, and the universe had learned to bow.